All right, we are back to segment 2. And we're going to start off with the Andrew T Miceli's second question. What are the consequences of pursuing high levels of flexibility, such as full splits? Is it possible to be healthy long term? I think you're going to hear me say this a lot, and I think we just have to kind of get used to this concept, is that we're dealing with an N=1 situation here. Some people will be predisposed genetically to be able to capture and access certain aspects of flexibility or mobility, however you want to look at it, because of their structure and genetic capabilities. Some people are just going to be better at certain things. And so some people are going to capture that flexibility very, very easily. They won't need some of the adaptations that other people need. Some people are structurally built to lift heavy things. Some people aren't, but they want to lift heavy things. And so their adaptations have to be a little bit different than those who are born with, you see these guys with the really, really big, thick wrists and big forearms and big joints. It's like they're predisposed to being stronger. They're predisposed to be tolerating heavier loads because their physical structure just allows it. So people like me that have these tiny little joints that pursued heavy strength training, I had to rely on a number of adaptations that some of the bigger guys, they were just born with. So I have to actually create this. So when we're talking about flexibility, it's going to be the same thing. Some people are going to be able to capture a lot of flexibility very easily, very early on. Some of us are going to have to work on it, and some of us will never get there because our structures just won't allow it. So we always have to look at the individual whenever we're talking about any kind of exercise prescription or any type of programming or any type of result. And so again, the interventions that you might use to try to capture an extreme amount of flexibility, depending on what you're pursuing, might be different than somebody that already has it. And so again, we always have to consider this from an individual level. All right, next, this is NYGXO, because I'm assuming that's what it is because it doesn't look like a name to me. This is actually a really good question. So if inhaling means abduction of the scaps and exhale means adduction of the I'm assuming the scap, why exhale the up part of a push-up and inhale down? I understand that a punch or a reach is naturally paired with an exhale, but if scapular and ribcage coherence is the goal, would you see value in changing that breathing pattern to reflect the scapular activity? Okay, so there's a lot of here to unpack. So let me start by saying that we have to stop looking at these elements of positions, respiration, etc. as an either or. So you're not just inhaled, you're not just exhaled. Actually, both are occurring at the same time at all times. And so a nice little representation to get in your head is, if I take a glass and I fill it up halfway with water, that would mean that it's 50% full. Well, it depends on your mindset and your perspective, I suppose. You might say it's 50% empty. And so that's the reality. It is that the glass is still part empty and it is part full. And so we have these transitions with all of our movement capabilities. We have these transitions with breathing, where it's not either or. So if I am externally rotated, I actually have an element of internal rotation that's still occurring, because what we have always measured things incorrectly. We have measured them from dead guy position, the traditional anatomical position, and those zeros are not actually where the zero occurs. And we'll talk about that at some other time. But the reality is that I want you to understand is that all things are occurring at the same time. So as I'm breathing in, I also have an element of exhalation that is superimposed on top. So as we're doing this push-up concept, we need to understand that we're somewhere where we're superimposing an inhalation upon an exhalation, and so one will be biased. And so that's what we're talking about when we're talking about positions during activities, and especially loaded activities. So with a push-up, we're always going to be biased towards an exhalation because we're producing force through the ground. So any kind of ground-based activity is always going to contain an element of exhalation that is superimposed over top of our inhalation. So what we want to try to maintain, though, if adaptability is the goal, is we want to maintain our ability to recapture enough inhalation during the up and down phases of the push-up. So at the top of a push-up is where we want to first emphasize an inhaled position, so we have a good starting point for the scapula to move through. So it's the starting point that's most important at the very beginning of the push-up. As we move through the phases, as we lower ourselves down, what we're actually going to see is a shift of the volume inside the axial skeleton. So what we want to be able to do is shift it from the posterior aspect of the thorax at the top of the push-up, which would be an inhale into the posterior aspect of the rib cage, and we should be able to transition that volume forward into the anterior aspect of the thorax. And if muscle activity does not allow that to occur, then we immediately have a restriction in shoulder range of motion. And so as we move through the push-up, let's not think of it as just a pure inhale and an exhale. Let's think of this as a shift of the fluid volume in the thorax, because that's what should happen under normal circumstances. That allows normal scapular motion and it allows normal glenohumeral motion to occur. So it's not this pure inhale, exhale kind of a thing. Again, it's a shift of fluid volumes, and we'll probably knock that out at some future time on some aspect of this, whether we do it on YouTube or whether we do it on an Instagram video. So I know it might be a little bit confusing at first, especially when you start to think about superimposing these things on top of one another, but we can be as coherent as possible with thorax and scapula. You just have to understand that both are occurring at the same time, and we're going to emphasize one or the other. And once again, that we're shifting volumes. We're not either purely inhaling or exhaling. All right, next question. Tyler James Wall, what drives you? My goodness. Can we have a more open question? What drives me? Well, here you go. I am insanely curious. I am driven a lot by frustration, because I know that we can always do better, and when I see things that aren't where I think they probably could be based on the information that's available, I get a little frustrated, and my frustration is in that I want to help other people understand these things. And this is why I'm trying to do this type of a communication. I'm not a big fan of spending all my time doing this, but it is getting kind of fun. I'll give you that. But the reality is, it's just this insane curiosity. It's a drive for me to be better, for me to be able to help more of my patients and my clients. There was a time where I wasn't terribly concerned, where I thought I was good enough, and I coasted for a while, and then I came to the realization that there were situations where I didn't know what the answer was. And I wanted to know what the answer was so I could be more clear, or I could be understood, or I could help someone else understand what they're going through, and eventually just reestablish, excuse me, and help them recapture their normal lifestyles. So at some point in time, the desire to feel good about myself internally was exceeded by my desire to help other people, and which is more of an external kind of a thing. And that's probably just a function of age, I would imagine, at some level, or maturity. I would probably lean in towards a maturity kind of thing. I was a late maturer on that regard, but I think that the desire to always be better, to always have another answer, to always expand my knowledge base. And it's exciting and it's fun. And so I don't feel like I'm driven per se. I just feel like I want to continue to move forward. We're here for a very short period of time on Earth, and I know you've probably heard that kind of a thing many times, but it is a dose of reality, especially when you get to be old like me, is that you kind of realize, like, okay, I'm 53 years old, I probably only have like 80 or 90 years left, and so you never know. And so I want to know more. I want to get better. I want to teach other people to get better. I want to help more people. And so again, it just becomes fun. I put up an Instagram post about passion a while back. And what passion is just emotional currency, so you can apply it to anything. And you know, I wasn't driven to be a physical therapist. I went to physical therapy school by default. I was bored with what I was doing. Seemed like a way that might be of reasonable interest. And then it was like, okay, this is fun. And then, like I said, I went through a period of complacency where I was I was still pretty good, but became my average. And then, I don't know, like I said, maturity, you flip a switch and everything sort of gets a lot more interesting. And so, again, I think there's a lot of things that keep me enthusiastic about what I'm doing, but I'm having a great time, especially in the last few years, probably in the last 3 or 4 years. My teaching is better. I'm more excited about more things. And so I guess that's what drives me, if there's anything that drives me. All right. Tyler James. By the way, my wife's son, also a Tyler James, but different last name, of course. Anyway, so how do you address limiting beliefs? And so I actually sent Tyler James here a clarification question. It's like, were you talking about my limiting beliefs or someone else's limiting beliefs? And so here's a dose of reality in regards to limiting beliefs. You're really not going to change them, because most people's beliefs are based on emotions, and you're never, ever going to change someone in that regard. So you can throw logic and reason at people. And so this goes with patients or clients or yourself. Logic and reason don't matter, because what we do is we decide things and we believe things based on our emotions, and then we rationalize with reason and logic. And so what has to happen over time is we have to gain experience. And it's the experiences that will influence us to the greatest degree. If you can show a client how they can physically change, then you have altered their belief, because now they can attach a new emotion, or they can attach a new feeling to it. That's how we impact other people's limiting beliefs, is giving them the experience of the change, letting them see things for themselves. They have to make that decision. We'll never make it for them. We'll never change anyone's mind. So, you know, your latest argument on Facebook or whatever, or you know, Twitter storms or whatever you want to do, it doesn't matter. You're not going to change people's opinions. You're not going to change their beliefs. They have to change those. But you're going to do that through experience. So the goal then, when you're working with another human, is to provide them with the experience that will allow them to make the change. And so that's how we have to think about those things. All right. Next question. I believe this comes from Russia, because I can't pronounce anything that's on here, so I'm going to spell it. It's Zdorovive, and there's a space, there's an S, and there's a UMOM. So, and I did go to his webpage, and it is in Russian, I believe. So anyway, so thank you for throwing me a question in English, because my Russian is very, very weak. What's going on with the person who can squat ass to grass but has no internal rotation of the femurs in a table test? Well, here's a dose of reality. So for me to sit down in the deepest possible squat, I don't really need a whole lot of internal rotation, depending on where the position of the hip is as I'm deep squatting. So the end ranges of a squat are actually external rotation positions. So as I descend into the squat, I am actually more externally rotated than internally rotated, and at the deepest possible positions of a squat, assuming I have a reasonable line between the foot, the knee, and the hip, is that position would be an externally rotated position. So I can sort of bypass that. Most of the internal rotation occurs through a middle arc, a middle range of a squat, if you will. And so again, some people can get around that through some form of compensatory strategy. There's a lot of ways that people squat that look deep, but they are still in a limited position. And this is probably going to be worthy of a tutorial video to really hash this concept out, because it's not as simple as people think. The hip is moving through internal to external rotation. The axial skeleton is moving through inhaled to exhaled positions as you move through a squat. And so as we understand that better, we'll see that there are many, many strategies to getting deep. Some people use compensatory strategies, some people use laxities, and they can get around some of these things, but you don't need massive amount of hip internal rotation to actually achieve a deep position in a squat pattern. But again, we have to clarify what we mean by that, and that's going to require a video or a picture or some frame of reference so we can actually understand what we're talking about, because not all deep squats are created equal. Things that look like they're ash to the grass are not always created equal. And so again, just to sort of wrap this concept, I don't need a massive amount of internal rotation to hit a deep squat. All right, next question from Saw Everything, and this is kind of a double-edged question, and I do have a tool for this one. So, is your body supported by triangles? Would a better understanding of the Platonic solids help paint a picture of geometry and nature, specifically our own design? I love this question because this is kind of stuff that I kind of geek out on a little bit, which is just kind of fun. I don't know how useful it is to understand, but I think when you understand where you come from, I think that things are a lot better. And so I got a little toy here. And this is my jitterbug, which always makes me think of George Michael, you know, the jitterbug. Anyway, so what a jitterbug is, though, is what I can do is I can manipulate this into a number of the different Platonic shapes. So if you're not familiar with those, you can look them up. It's on Google. Just put in Platonic shapes. But what you're going to find is that everything can be reduced down to a tetrahedron, so that's a three-dimensional triangle. So that's what a tetrahedron is. And so we're made up of those. And the reason that we're made up of those is because the universe moves towards efficiency. And so what I mean by that is we're always looking for the lowest energy level. So humans follow the premise of never stand when you can sit, never sit when you can lay down, and never lay down when you can sleep. And so we're always looking for the lowest energy positions or strategies. And so what the triangle represents is a very, very stable structure. It's a very low energy, stable structure. Things will move towards the tetrahedral structure just naturally. If we look at the universe, the planets are round and spherical because that, again, is the most efficient shape. So a sphere has the greatest internal volume with the least surface area, whereas a tetrahedron has the least internal volume with the greatest surface area. So it's sort of representative of a similar concept. But the reason that we're made up of tetrahedrons versus spheres is because there's no curves in biology. There's only straight lines. And so we have to find something that sort of approximates this spherical concept. And so if I take enough tetrahedrons and I put them together, I create what's called an icosahedron. So if I take my jitterbug and I compress it just a little bit, that's actually an icosahedron. And so this is made up of a bunch of those tetrahedrons. And so we're actually constructed with things like that. And if you don't believe me, all you got to do is you look at a cross-section of a muscle fiber, and you'll see this icosahedral structure in the way that the myosin and actin filaments are organized. If you look at a close-up of skin cells, you'll see that they're all icosahedral. And again, what this allows us to do is it allows us to be adaptable. So I can change the shape, and then it will come right back to its original shape. And so that gives us an element of adaptability within the system. It allows us to distribute loads and forces throughout the system rather than absorbing them in small areas, which would result in destructive elements. And so that's what we don't want. And so again, we are constructed of these triangles because, one, it's a very stable structure. It's a very adaptable structure when we superimpose them into much larger shapes. And it's very useful. And so again, I would look towards, like, if you want to look up things on Google, like geodesic domes and things like that, they're all constructed the same way, with a progressive series of triangles, because they are adaptable and then they are structurally stable. So take a look at that. Next question. So this is from Colin Butler. What is your criteria for identifying someone that you can't help with your skill set? This is actually a pretty easy question to ask. This is utter and miserable failure. So we just don't know who we're going to help at first. And so we have to try, because we never know what aspect of the we never understand what aspect of the system is the greatest influence in the limitation in variability. So let me come back to the Collins question. I got to change out the camera one more time.